Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and today I've got with me Katie Beecher. I'm going to read Katie's bio, and then we're going to get started having a conversation. Katie Beecher, MS, LPC, is a licensed professional counselor, and she's a medical and emotional intuitive with over 30 years of experience. She's featured in Goop and Kourtney Kardashian's website Poosh and Miranda Cora Organics blog. She has a unique way of working with clients, which we're going to talk about. She creates a detailed, individualized physical, emotional, and spiritual report and a symbolic painting before she ever sees a client, before she talks with them, or before seeing a photograph, using only their name and age. She's working on a new book. It's called Soul Inspired. We'll talk about that. It's going to be published, coming out soon. And it's about what she does as a medical intuitive, her own healing from eating disorder, Lyme disease, and other serious illness, and helping others heal and connect to their intuition using information from her guides and using Jungian psychology. So with that, I want to welcome Katie Becker.
Thank you.
Katie Beecher, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Katie
That's
Beecher.
quite all right.
Yeah, I am a little flustered today. I was telling Katie before we got on, I was on another call before this, and it messed up my entire system. My camera wouldn't work or anything. I'm used to going through this with near-death experiencers, but this was a little bit different. This was actually on my end, so I appreciate your patience, Katie.
No problem.
So, what I would like to do is just introduce you to my audience. So first of all, tell me a little bit about Katie. Who are you?
Well, right now, anyway, for the past probably 7-8 years, I've worked primarily as a medical and spiritual intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I was mostly a licensed counselor, even though I worked really intuitively as a counselor. And I help people all over the world with medical problems, emotional stuff, spiritual stuff, relationships, trauma, basically a little bit of everything. Some people who hire me are actually sick and have illnesses, and some people just want to know more about, how to make their relationships better or connect to intuition, things like that.
Okay. So you're, how did you get started as a medical intuitive? How did you realize you had this ability?
That is a question I always get asked. And because it's very, as much as I love my work, it's really strange. And to try and explain it to how I know the things I know is, I don't think I actually could, even though I've learned to trust it very much. But as a kid, I was always picking up people's energies, and I knew things, about the adults that were talking, just their moods or what was going on. Or I'd tell my parents things about other adults, and they'd be like, how do you know that? And I was always super sensitive, picking up environmental stuff, close to animals, that kind of thing. And then I started to pick up the energy of people from the other side. I guess you would call them dead people, but a lot of the energy was negative and evil, and it was very, very scary. So as you can imagine, as a kid, you want nothing to do with it. And I just turned it all off. So coming from a very dysfunctional family, I developed an eating disorder and pretty severe depression, was close to suicide. And I really believe it was divine intervention that saved me. And I called our pediatrician at the age of 16 without telling my parents and said, this is what I'm doing. And he didn't seem too flustered by it. It was, 1983. They weren't really talking about eating disorders that much, but thankfully I pushed, and he gave me the name of a Jungian therapist. Took me a couple months to get the courage to call her, but, fortunately I did. And I don't know how much you know about Jungian philosophy or Jungian psychology, but he was very open to things like intuition and mediumship and astrology, and he used astrology in his work and drew from just all kinds of disciplines. So she was the perfect person for me to work with, because she helped me to connect my intuition and find self-love and to accept, the weird things that were happening, to accept my abilities and not to be afraid of them,
Mm-hmm.
and to learn to use them. And so I've been recovered from bulimia for 30 years, which is amazing, over 30 years now. Became a counselor, and wasn't really using my abilities that much for anything. They'd more like, for friends or something, and things would come up. And then as I would start to work with clients, I was starting to channel their relatives during sessions. And it was very natural, but also very weird at the same time. But I realized, I can't ignore this any longer, and I need to pursue it. So I joined a spiritualist church.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That was nearby. And for people who don't know, they actually had medium readings and things during their services. It's
Right.
a pretty cool experience. So then about 12 years ago, my mom got a flu shot, and she became 100% paralyzed and blind. And I went on this path of just learning about toxins and all kinds of other things, which has been really, really valuable experience. But I ended up being her caretaker. There's family discord, the whole thing that goes along with all that kind of stuff. And I realized that the work I've been doing as a counselor and as an artist just wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't fulfilling, the same need. I wasn't doing as much helping as I would like. Mm-hmm. And I started looking for other things to do. And I ended up going to a workshop for 3 days with a medical intuitive, just kind of on a whim. I didn't really know much about it. And after, like, the first thing she did was say, I'm going to give you the name and an age of person or animal or something. And I didn't think I would know anything, but I ended up being able to see what they looked like and know things about their life and their childhood and their health, and kind of, surprising me as much as anyone else. But at the end of the first day, she said, I don't know what you do in real life, but you should pursue this. So I kind of took an online class with her. It was a once a month thing. And then I've just been doing it ever since. And I really feel like this is my calling.
Wow. So
long answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate the background. So what age did you start feeling people from the other side?
I remember, being like 2 or 3 and just knowing things about my parents and being able to pick things up from them, and actually feeling like almost like somebody was talking to me from the other side. Like, these people are not responsible enough to raise you. You have to kind of raise yourself, just a deep knowing. And I remember around 10, when The Exorcist came out, is when I was more cognizant of picking up, evil things.
Yeah.
My therapist said it's because I realized that evil does exist. So I took it seriously.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions to ask you. So one of the things is, a lot of times I work with a lot of mediums, and they'll say there's a difference between a psychic and a medium. And the difference is psychics can pick up things from people on this side, mediums can pick up from things on people on the other side. So it sounds like you're getting both.
I do get both. I do. When I do my readings, I do the report first, and it's very long. And I download information from my guides, but I also often get information about the person in the present. But I also get information from their loved ones who have passed on a pretty regular basis, or sometimes their pets. So it's definitely a combination of both. I primarily work on the here and now, like, what can we do about making your life better now and moving forward, and definitely resolving trauma and things like that. But I really believe in, being able to let go of as much as possible in a healthy way and just moving forward.
Yeah. So, so when you do this, your guides and their loved ones are giving the information about the target, the person that you're trying to that you're reading.
Right.
And so you learned about you said their traumas, I guess their medical conditions, and what other
Literally
types of,
everything.
okay.
It's their, I use, first of all, I use the 7 chakras, which are the 7 energy centers in the body for people who
Mm-hmm.
don't know. So it allows me to look at the person as a whole. And I look at emotional, spiritual, and physical issues.
Okay.
And it's literally everything. It's their physical characteristics, problems that they're having with their physical body, emotional issues, it's traumas, childhood stuff, family things, relationships, career, how they are working with their intuition or how afraid of it they are. I
Mm-hmm.
help people connect with that. And because I really feel like you have to look at the whole person.
Yeah.
We're not one dimensional. And for me, I've had enough strange experiences myself that just looking at physical didn't, give me the answers that I needed. So
Yeah, well, we're physical, mental, spiritual beings, so I think it makes sense to look at us in a more well-rounded way. The other thing that's interesting is the idea of evil and what evil is. So I know that some people in the spiritual world say, well, there is no such thing as evil. It's all love and light. Some people say there is evil, and you talk about the fact that you were able to recognize evil, and you also talk about protecting ourselves from evil. So tell me
yeah,
more about like what this evil is and how we interact with it.
sure. And this is just my perspective.
Hmm.
So other people may have had different experiences, but I definitely do believe in love. And then the opposite of that to me is evil, if you will. And I guess I define evil as um, something that makes you turn away from yourself and your authenticity and love and
Hmm.
loving other people, and something that causes, tries to make problems between people and to, create prejudices and biases and things like that. And the way that it made sense to me as far as the evil that I was picking up is that it was trying to use fear to keep me away from the abilities that I was going to use to help people heal and love themselves and connect to love and intuition. And I believe that intuition is God within, which is not from me. It's a Carl Jung term. But, I
Hmm.
believe that when we're connected to intuition, it's our authenticity. It's love. It's something that keeps us safe and
Hmm.
it's nurturing. So, and I've unfortunately grew up in a home where there was a lot of evil, and that is what I determined I was picking up. It wasn't from my old house. It wasn't from, it was from my home. And
Hmm.
I've consequently had to separate myself from those individuals. But, and I guess I don't look at evil as something that can possess you, that is all powerful. I think that we can be vulnerable to it.
Hmm.
Like if we are in states of substance abuse where we're not cognizant of what's going on, or if we actively engage with evil people or spirits or something like that. But I was always taught that as long as you're connected with love, you're always protected and nothing can hurt you.
Hmm.
And so, and it's that those fears that keep people from connecting to intuition and connecting to their psychic abilities, if you will, which I think we all have.
Yeah. So when you talk about evil, then are we talking about evil entities? Are we talking about evil as like a force or?
I guess to me, it's more of a force that people can definitely become attracted to. Although I
Mhm.
do have a weird story for you about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, so I was in college, and my then boyfriend was living in Connecticut, and I was in DC. And we were talking on the phone one night, and all of a sudden, I could see the moon outside of his room in Connecticut from DC.
Mhm.
And I just started to feel very strange. I couldn't explain it. And he said, I feel like there's something strange going on too. And the next thing I knew, I was having an out of body experience and I was in his room in Connecticut,
Hmm.
which had never happened to me before. I wasn't trying to do it. It wasn't something I asked for. So it felt okay. It was fine. And then I guess whatever led me to that decided to have me come back. And I remember being attached to this metallic cord, and this, I don't even know what you call it. I'll call it an entity, if you will, literally jumped on my back as I was trying to get back. And I've felt evil before. This was the most intense evil I had ever felt in my life. It was terrifying. It was sort of half monkeyish creature with some human to it. And I just kept saying the Lord's Prayer over and over and over. And I remember physically shaking to try and get it off, and it finally left. So that was definitely different. And so it was something.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as I said, I talk to people. Some people say they don't believe this type of entity exists, and other people say they've had experience with it. So,
Right.
if you've had an experience with it, you have. But as you were talking about it earlier, talking about evil, it reminded me. I'm reading this series of books now. It's called The Team, and there's a concept in this, and she calls it vibrational spheres. And these are like energy spheres that are that we can contribute to as humans. And so as we choose love and light, we contribute to those spheres. If we become addicted to something, we contribute to that sphere, and people can get kind of caught up in the pull of these different spheres.
Interesting.
That kind of made sense to me as a concept of what something that like an evil attraction or something might be.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, energy definitely exists, love definitely exists. So why isn't there, the counter to that? And we certainly have seen examples in our, presently, and through history, of
Yeah.
people who are evil. I don't know any other word for it.
Yeah, well, there's certainly, there's light and love, and then there's some people say the opposite of love is fear. And I kind of like that
Right.
saying.
And
So
evil uses fear as its tool. So I definitely subscribe to
yeah. So how do we protect ourselves against it?
what I learned was when I learned to connect with intuition, which is, my authentic self,
Hmm.
um, the love within, God within, as long as you're just in a space of love and you're a loving person and you have good intentions, you're protected. I don't think we have to do anything fancy. I think that if you are subjected to people that make you feel bad, especially bad about yourself, there's abuse, there's whatever. I think
Yeah.
the more you're subjected to that, the more that um, you are susceptible to those kinds of fears and that negativity, because you don't treat yourself well and you're not going to treat other people well. And that's how the negativity spreads. But I honestly, I don't think that you need to do anything special except be in a place of love and kindness.
Yeah. So it's no spells or anything like that. It's really a matter of choosing to stay positive and to love yourself, I guess, is what you're saying.
I think so. And
Mhm.
not that there aren't credible people who do energy healing,
Mhm.
who can help with, energy blocks or helping infuse you with loving energy and things like that.
Mhm.
Not
Sure.
there's not people who do help with that,
Right.
but I think we have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your bio that you had healed from the eating disorder, which you mentioned earlier. You had from as a child, but you had also Lyme disease.
I did. Yeah, I
Okay.
found out approximately 5 or 6 years ago that I had it since I was a child, growing up in Connecticut, 2 towns over from Lyme.
Mm.
And it was every case of Lyme is very different. No matter, who you are, it's just going to present with different symptoms. But I didn't have it to where it was debilitating, but I knew something was just not right. And the doctor that I worked with was a naturopath that I'd worked with for, since I was 17. He just helped me with a lot of different things. So he was very experienced.
Hmm.
And he said I had probably been treating it for my whole life, just treating symptoms with different, food or vitamins or whatever I was doing.
Hmm.
Um, but a really fascinating thing happened from that. As I got better, the depression that I had suffered since I was, an adolescent went away. And
Hmm.
that was pretty amazing. I was not expecting that.
Yeah. So how did you start getting better from the Lyme disease?
He treats pretty naturally.
Okay.
Again, every treatment's a little bit. For me, I really did not want to use antibiotics because I have horrible tolerance to them, and I didn't feel I needed them, and so we were able to do that. I looked at it from a spiritual point of view and said, "What is going on in my life? Why is this happening now? What how could this be manifesting as fear? What is the message here? How is God, intuition, whatever, trying to get my attention and get me to see what I need to change?" And for me, it was writing the proposal to my book that I knew I needed to write since I was 16. But so we, looked at it from all different points of view. He also used a Rife machine. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
It's an electronic frequency machine. It can definitely be controversial. People have made claims that are not accurate about it. But for me and for a lot of the other people that I know, it definitely was part of me getting better. So I basically used whatever I could use, really tried to look at it from all directions, diet and everything. But it was individualized treatment, which I think is super important for anything.
Yeah. So you mentioned also that I think Jungian psychology plays a big part in your philosophy in your life. So tell me a little bit more about. I know a little bit about it. I know it sounds like a kind of almost a spiritual form of psychology.
It is. He has written hundreds of books, and it's the kind of book that you read and then it hurts your head after, but you got something out of it.
Right.
He was a successful psychiatrist in his time, which is sort of the early to mid 1900s. And he was a disciple of Freud at first, and then they split off. But he actually developed a lot of his theories and practices from waking trances that he used to go into. And he started I think this is one of the more interesting parts of his life, and it kind of applies to a lot of what I do, but he started having these visions of bloody rivers and people in the water who were bloody and just sort of warlike scenes and didn't know what they were. And he thought he was going crazy and having a nervous breakdown. And everyone around him said, "Don't tell people about that. Just check yourself in somewhere. There's something wrong with you." And to his credit, he courageously decided to go towards it instead of going away from it. And he put himself into these waking trances to try and learn what was going on. And he developed relationships with different intuitive guides. He did a series of very elaborate, amazing watercolors. And he actually wrote a dialogue to the people that he was meeting in these trances. And it became something called the Red Book.
Okay.
Which, if you have not seen or looked at, it's amazing. It's all in script and the pictures are beautiful. And it's one of those you can read a little bit of and then have to take a break. But so to this day, some people said he actually did have a nervous breakdown, but his mom's whole side of the family were mediums. His dads were religious pastors and things like that. So, but a lot of people, and I do believe that this is the case, believe that he was actually having a premonition to World War I. He lived in Europe, and it was the things that he described later were very much like scenes that actually did happen. So consequently, his way of practicing is a lot of emphasizing talking to your inner spirit, talking to your symptoms, for example, instead of fighting them, seeing them as friends and asking, "Why are you here? What do you need for me to heal?" A lot of symbolism, a lot of mythology type stuff, dream interpretation, really believing that we have what we need inside of us to heal. We just need to have it brought out. And I have to say that connecting with intuition and finding self-love and self-acceptance is why I healed. And without that, I wouldn't even be here.
Yeah, I think what you said there is very important, and I think a lot of us, have really struggled with that, connecting with our intuition and our own power. Well, we're taught that we're powerless. A lot of us have been taught by people around us
Right.
that we're powerless, and to we're not, we're sinners, stuff like that, and we're
Right.
told to go to doctors and trust what the doctor says, and that we're always giving our power away. It seems like.
I really agree. I really, really agree. And we need each other, and we need each other's wisdom, but I always tell people, I never want you to substitute my intuition for yours. So when I send people the reports before we meet in the paintings, but we always go over them together. And I always say, if something doesn't fit, I want to know, and let's figure out why it's there. Or, could it be for somebody that you love or somebody in your past, or is it symbolic, or am I just having an off day with that one? There's like 75 bits of pieces of information on each report, so it's extensive. So, sometimes I'll get something for the person that I was doing the reading for just before them, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important that it be an interactive process.
Yeah.
And I empower them.
Yeah. So you said people come to you sometimes with medical conditions,
Mhm.
and so are you a healer, or do you diagnose, and
Yeah,
how does that work?
very good question. So while I am a Reiki master and I've done other forms of hands-on healing and distance healing, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But primarily, well, number one, I don't diagnose because it's illegal and
Right.
unethical.
Right. Right.
And especially as a licensed professional counselor, it's especially important that I don't do that.
Right.
So even when I am giving people details, if I pick up symptoms, if I hear a quote diagnosis, I will put everything down that I hear and then check it out with the person, because sometimes they know it already and sometimes it's new.
Mm-hmm.
But I have people that I really trust that I refer to, medical people
Mm-hmm.
who can either verify my information, who can do some testing, who can do some different types of treatment, things like that, because I like working with a team. I like having people have other support, but also because I'm not a test.
Right.
I'm not a doctor and don't want to play one on TV,
Right.
as the commercial goes. So, but so like, for example, with medical stuff, I can say, these are some of the herbs that are coming up that I think would be helpful, or these are some of the strategies within your relationship, or whatever. And then I always say, please, as far as medical stuff, please check these out with your physician, check them out with you, see how it feels to your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look up whatever else you're on or using to make sure there's no interactions.
Right.
So,
Right.
herbs are not candy, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm really proud of that, and I'm especially careful about that. And I've also had my abilities and accuracy, I don't know if tested is the right word, but we did an article in a peer-reviewed journal edited by an MD, and we did a informal study of like 75 or 80 of my clients, and also a lot of their physicians. So we use their medical records.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's pretty cool. It was important to me as a clinician to do that. And I found it came out to be 95% accurate as an average. So that was pretty cool.
Wow, that's incredible. That's amazing, and I love that you've done that. I'm a scientist myself. My background is chemical engineering, and so even as I study all this woo woo stuff, to use that
Right.
word, I think it should be able to be tested, to
Right.
some extent. We can't test everything. We can't test everything clinically,
Right.
but we can correlate data, and we can figure out whether or not this makes sense. So it's not just your feeling that you're being inaccurate. So give me some idea without disclosing any confidentialities, of course, of the types of things that you've been able to diagnose,
Okay,
or
so
not diagnose, to
right to help
uncover.
find there you go. Literally everything. I mean, I can't even, the list is so long, but I do work with Lyme people. There's a lot of things that get misdiagnosed,
Yes.
especially autoimmune wise. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of autoimmune things, PCOS, help with fertility, things that emotional issues. I have a client who is recovered from a brain tumor, who's having seizures. Literally like everything you can think of, like autism and God, just everything. Just general sort of, weird little mystery symptoms and pains and mold, a lot of mold toxicity stuff and chemical sensitivity and food things, gut things. There's a lot of, I really like the overlap of the spirituality and the physicality, because I often will be able to tell if somebody has had sexual trauma of some type, and they don't often relate it to the physical emotional issues that they're having, especially, they've done a lot of work on it. So to be able to connect all these little dots of this is kind of still going on. These are some things that, more onion skin that you have to peel back.
Right.
Or what happens a lot is people will come to me with physical issues, and sometimes they'll say, I don't think anything else is going on. It's just, I have this, whatever. And, in the report, I'll uncover that they're in a really bad marriage. Been in it for a long time, or they hate their job or whatever. And, we talk about the fact that you're not going to feel physically better until you make those changes. And a lot of them are waiting to make the changes until they feel better.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting, as you were talking about some of those things, I was thinking, you mentioned Lyme and you mentioned mold. And I know someone that was going through different diagnoses for things like that, because a lot of times we don't know where the mold is. We don't know. And Lyme presents in different ways. Food allergies. So would you get something like you should stop eating corn?
Yeah, that happens. Or I can pick out, oftentimes I can pinpoint in their house where the mold is. That's happened several times. Or if I'll pick up, when you're in this place, do you have more reactions? Yeah, I never thought of that. If like sometimes their house could be fine when it's in their barn, or it's in their place of work, or things like that, or I'll say, I feel like as you've gotten older, you're much less tolerant to dairy, or, that kind of thing. So I just basically go with whatever my guides put in my head. And I have to be very, very careful not to interpret it, because as a human, I can mess it up. And it's also why I want to know as little as possible about the people before I start the reading, because my human biases can make all sorts of assumptions, and then I can screw up the reading. And when I started, I had to be really careful about that. But a really good example, I was doing a reading on a 12-year-old girl, and I heard tooth enamel. So as a human, I thought she must have, bad teeth and cavities and everything. And when I was talking to her mom and about it, she said, you just wrote tooth enamel. And I said, that's what I heard. And she said, her teeth are extraordinarily strong. So that was an identifier to show them that I was actually tuned into them. Because my guide gave me a lot of that to prove to people that, yes, you are, accurate. You're in tune. You got all this stuff. So it wasn't about a negative thing. It was about a positive thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So with your clients, when they book in a new client, so that you just get their name and then you start the report before you ever meet them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I get their name and age. Obviously, I get their email because we email each other,
Right.
and phone number. And then I have sort of a template for my reports that it's 4 pages and it's all the chakras and things.
Mm-hmm.
It's very detailed and very personal. I've had some critics say, well, you can just go to social media, or you could do some kind of a search, get a PI or something. And the information is very, very personal. A lot of the time it's things they've never told anyone, things from their whole lifespan. So it's not something, a lot of my clients don't even have social media accounts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, I start to do that. I do the report first, and then I create a symbolic energy painting in watercolor for me, because I just like watercolor. And it can be a figure or an animal or a plant, or they're all different. And then my guides start by telling me to start with a color, and then I'll start making lines and stuff. And they sort of say, okay, keep going. So they tell me where to put the colors. And I don't usually know what the painting means until we interpret it at the end, because my guides give me a lot more information. But it both confirms the information in the report and also gives additional information. Like sometimes the painting will pick up sexual abuse or sexual trauma by creating a red area in the hips, for example. And I'll hear the word trauma. And I didn't get that in the report. So it's nice to have both of those tools.
So what's your relationship with your guides like? Do you know their names? Do they have?
Yeah, it's everybody, has a different experience. There are some people who used to be on this planet, like my grandma and my mom and a couple other people, who I do, know of. I don't know the names of the rest of my guides. I know one is a Native American male. I always see him wearing this big chief thing. And then there's a younger female. There's a younger female who I think is part of his tribe. And then there's I see it as me sitting at a round table with just tons and tons of people around it who are helping them. I think we all have armies of people who are looking after us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard that we all have guides, and some people I've heard anywhere from 1 to dozens, and I guess some people's guides, they say they come and they go during their lifetimes,
Right.
depending on what your season is or what your
Right.
particular needs are. So you create this report and you sit down and you go over it with the client, I guess, and you confirm things, back and forth. And you were saying that you get actually, evidential things. This is not just like, you're a happy kind of a person.
It's very evidential. That's incredibly important to me. And that's also why I send it before we meet. They get it the day before. They get all the day before, so I can't BS it. And it's very detailed. It's, very, very, very detailed. So, and the first thing I hear is, how the hell did you do that?
Yeah.
And then that was weird, but really cool. I'm like, yeah. So yeah. And when I went to the spiritualist church, they talked a lot about evidential mediumship, which is different from, I think it's different from regular mediumship in that you give evidence of actually talking to the person and knowing the person and things that other people wouldn't know. And, I think that's really important to add to the credibility.
Yeah. Now, do people also come to you for medium readings, or?
Sometimes, not as much,
Okay.
primarily the other stuff, but sometimes, as I said, I will get information often from their loved ones. And especially I don't know how much you know about chakras, but the 4th chakra is the heart chakra. And for some reason, that's where I often get the most information. I'll hear from somebody who either has died from that area, or so they'll tell me like what they died from, or something about them. And that's interesting where they often come through. Sometimes in the first chakra, which has to do with like family and safety, security, and things like that. So I naturally get, information about loved ones there too. But yeah, I do readings on animals too, which is super fun.
Yeah.
Like horses and dogs and cats and other things, which you learn how much like humans they really are when you do some of that work. It's cool.
Yeah. Well, give me an example of an animal that you did a reading for.
Yeah. So horses are my favorite, partly because I know nothing about them. I've never been around horses. And so I guess one of my favorite ones that I've worked with repeatedly is she was a doctor and she had this horse, and they had very similar personalities. They had some similar health issues. They had inflammation in similar parts of their bodies. The horse it had just a huge personality. And, when she didn't come, the horse would get mad at her when she didn't come visit her.
Oh,
it had gut issues. It had some Lyme and mold as well. So we were working with all of that. And it's, they also tell me things about their owners, which is really interesting. So because they really want us to be healthy and they really care about us, they're here for us, to be our companions and to love us. So they want us to be as healthy as possible too.
Yeah.
But it's a lot like doing a reading on a human. They sort of tell me things like I'm talking to you.
Okay. So if I were to say I want to do a reading on my dog, would you hear from my dog or would you hear from your guides or both?
It's both.
Okay.
It's definitely both. Which is kind of different. Well, I guess it is different than when I do a human one. Because, and also not always. Sometimes the animals are deceased. Like I can do this on dead people too, which is kind of neat. And some people just want to know about, their animal who has passed or whatever. But yeah, interesting with animals. I hear from them and get information, more neutral information, I guess, from my guides. So
yeah. Well, we talked a lot about medical intuition. Why else do people come to you? If I'm not having a medical condition, what would be the reason?
Yeah. So they want to know about their life purpose. They feel like what they're doing is okay, but it's not what they wanted to do their whole lives. And they feel like they're off track, or they want to create a business, or they want to do some kind of healing work or spiritual work. And either they don't know how to get started, or they have self-doubt, or, they're afraid of doing something new. Sometimes it's relationships, how can I make my relationship better? It's, resolving trauma. I work with a lot of people who've been through trauma and how to come back from it and feel empowered and really be able to feel good about yourself. And I really like working with trauma people because you can just make such a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, and, mental health stuff, certainly. And just people who want to learn to connect to their intuition and their psychic abilities. Part of just about every reading I do is some techniques that I use to help people connect with their intuition. Because I really feel like that's an important part of healing. So, yeah.
So what type of things would that include? Learning to
connect? My favorite one, and this is what healed me, literally, I would not be alive without this. It's a Jungian technique. I can't take credit for it. But it's, first of all, it's seeing intuition as this loving force that knows everything about you. It doesn't care what you look like, what you weigh, there's no judgment, unconditional acceptance. And it's sort of like this bodyguard that is with you all the time. So it's always keeping you safe, which is a different way of looking at intuition. So the technique is to physically write down a question, statement, your feelings, direct it to your intuition. If it's uncomfortable for people to say intuition, I say, well, address it to God, or address it to, your grandma that you were really close to, or whatever. Just do what's comfortable. So write that down and then just sit and wait for what you hear, feel, see in response to what you wrote. And then write back to it. And then see what you get in response, write that down, write back to it for as long as you feel like it. Sometimes these conversations are 5 minutes. Sometimes I do it for 20 minutes. And it's the way that I talk to my guides. I kind of use intuition and guides in my life as sort of, interchangeable. And sometimes the things that kind of trip people up are overthinking. Like, is this really me? Why did it just sound like my voice? Why aren't I having an out-of-body experience when I do this?
Yeah.
Why am I just hearing 1 or 2 words? Or why aren't I hearing anything? Or so I just kind of tell people, go with what you get and be open to it. And then also some people will hear things not related to what they asked about. And that's totally okay, because our intuition has other stuff to tell us. Like, we're not in control all the time,
Yeah. It's interesting because as you were describing what the intuition is, I got the impression, I was thinking, like, this sounds like God, but not the God we were taught about in Sunday school. This is like the idealized version of God,
Absolutely.
right? That always loves us, that always cares about us, that there's no judgment. So that is the part of ourselves. And that's an interesting dynamic too, because as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about, is that God? Is that my higher self? Is that my guides?
And it doesn't really matter what you call it.
Right.
The way that it made sense to me when I was learning it, when I had zero self-esteem, didn't even know what intuition was that it was the source. So if it was the source, it made me. And if it made me, it sees me as perfect. It doesn't lie to me, and it doesn't just give me a bunch of BS, like, it tells me the truth. But it's on my side, and it knows what's best for me. And, at the time it was all eating disorder stuff. So it didn't care what I weighed or what I looked like or how many calories I ate that day. It really did not give a shit. It was just, you're lovable, you're acceptable, be yourself. When I connected to it, I felt like for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone anymore.
Yeah.
I was by myself. So Jung calling it God within, I think, is a really great description. And like you said, God meaning the one that loves all of us, that it doesn't matter what you call it.
Yeah. And I love what you said there, because I think in going back to what we were talking about earlier with all the negativity that's going on right now, I think another thing that's happening at this particular point in time, as we're recording this in January of 2021, is a lot of people are feeling very lonely.
Absolutely.
So this idea of connecting to our intuition might be something that we could all use a little bit more, as we're so isolated right now.
Absolutely. And just, helping you to accept yourself, and therefore being able to accept others, and maybe not feeling like we're so different, maybe seeing our similarities, and just, forgiving yourselves for being human. And then you can look at other people and not see them as there's something wrong with them. Or, I think so much of the problems I'm not even going to go into, I was going to say the last 4 years, but I'm not touching that, of a lot of, history maybe, is that we don't either have the time or opportunity to get to know people who are, quote, different from us. And I think that's just essential, and it's really sad that there are people who still see so many differences.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we are so quick to judge ourselves. And I think that also we project that onto other people as well, because we're taught that we're not worthy because we made a mistake, or we're overweight, or we're underweight, or we're too tall, or we're too short, or whatever it is. And, the idea of love really begins with ourselves. And I think that's something I keep hearing, coming from you over and over again.
Yeah.
And for me, that's so counter to the image, or what I was told, when we were told as children. It's like, you should be giving, you should give to everybody else. You should take care of other people before you take care of yourself. And taking care of yourself is a selfish thing to do.
Right. And often if you grow up in a dysfunctional family where there's, substance abuse or narcissism or mental illness or whatever, you grow up having to figure out what those other people need before they need it. Because if you don't respond the way they need you to, you're going to get abandoned and you're going to be rejected. So it's not about getting to know ourselves or trusting our own intuition. It's really about detachment from that. And then you kind of learn through guilt and rejection.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because I think it's a little bit of both, because so many mediums and intuitives do grow up in dysfunctional families, and they grow up with people that are abusive. And what I've heard is, I guess it's because you have to learn to read that other person. That, for most of us, we come in with our intuition and it kind of shuts down,
Right.
and we forget about it. But for people that have to use it that way, it maybe seems to heighten it.
It does. I think empathy is definitely a learned skill.
Yeah.
And it's a learned survival skill for a lot of people. And for some people that means psychic ability. For some people, like, empathic ability is different from psychic ability or different from mediumship.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think it's a learned skill. And I think that it's where boundaries can get really iffy and we lose ourselves and, the person and don't realize we can be separate. But yeah, and I really believe that all of the so-called negative experiences I've been through are, like, the eating disorder was the best thing that ever happened to me, which sounds really crazy. But if I hadn't gotten it, I wouldn't have separated from my family. I wouldn't have learned to get to know my intuition or accept my abilities or learn my life path or so many things. I'm just so grateful for it. And so many of the things, like right before I found out I had Lyme, I started to get all these Lyme clients. And I thought, okay, come on, really? But everything I learned about helps me help others more. So, it's an interesting road.
It is. And, that what you said, you're grateful for your eating disorder. I that doesn't sound weird to me at all, because I've talked to so many people who are grateful for their cancer, or grateful for their divorce, or grateful for, whatever it is that it seems to have taken to awaken us up and to give us, actually, it could be an opportunity to grow. And nobody wants to hear that when they're going through it. But once we come out the other side, we can say, hey, then maybe that was there for my own good.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of people who work for me that, we talk about things that they didn't relate to other things. And, like, you gave me the courage to be able to leave my husband that I needed to leave for, 20 years, or because we discovered this, I realized if I want to heal, I have to get a new job, even if it's scary, or having this and not finding help from traditional medicine forced me to learn about spirituality, which I never would have done otherwise. Or, tons and tons of stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you're working on your book. And so tell me what that's going to be when that comes out.
Yeah. So the title is actually, it just got changed. It's Heal from Within, A Guide to Intuitive Wellness.
Okay.
And it's being published by St. Martin's Press. They're super great. And it's basically taking people through a reading. It gives a little bit of my backstory and how I got to where I am, and then talks about what is intuition, how to connect to it, and explains, the chakras as I work with them. But it's helping people identify their issues, figure out where in the body and in their energy field these issues are, so they know how to address them. Gives them a lot of emotional, spiritual, and physical root causes for what they have. Helps them to develop strategies for addressing these things. And then kind of like different creative exercises. Like, I teach people in the book how to make one of my paintings, one of my creative. Yeah. Okay. I actually do workshops on that too. Take people through just how to do the paintings, because you don't have to be medical intuitive or any special person to do some of this stuff, and then during the workshop, we interpret them all individually, which is super fun. So it's kind of like my husband calls it Katie Beecher, the home game. But it's taking them through a reading process the best that I can, just as if they were having one with me, and looking at everything going on with them, and then devising a plan for health and wellness and healing moving forward.
Okay. So is this taking them through doing a reading on themselves?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all the steps that I use. It's actually, there's a blank template of the reports that I actually use.
Mm-hmm.
And I show them how to tap into their intuition, to fill that out for themselves, to look at the different chakras and say, okay, this is like thyroid, for example. It's the fifth chakra because that's the throat. So what are the emotional characteristics of the fifth chakra? What are the physical characteristics? And it's about being able to speak up for yourself, or giving out too much information,
Mm-hmm.
or how well you communicate, or how well you're being heard as well.
Mm-hmm.
How empowered you feel or not. There's so many different aspects to it. And then I encourage them to look at all these things and say, which of these applies to you? Which do you think is happening in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of like quizzes in there and worksheets and suggestions for connecting with your intuition. There's the exercise that I described to you is in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of, I wanted it to be very interactive and hands-on. And so people could, I can't work with everyone. So
Right.
it's not a substitute for a reading. I'm not trying to say it is, but
Right.
I think it's a really helpful tool. Like people who've read it so far have said like, it's very, you make it very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes me feel good because when I'm writing it, I don't remember what I'm writing,
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for people to start to learn a little bit more to trust our own intuition. And as
Totally.
I've been down this path myself, and I talked to so many medical intuitives and mediums and stuff, a lot of us lay people will say, well, I could never do that. I could never do what you do. And you've
Yes.
got some magical ability that the rest of us don't have. So what would you say to someone that said something like that?
That happens a lot. What I say is that we all have intuitive abilities, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be more apparent when you're young because you haven't been told to fear it or to not trust it yet, or that you're the devil incarnate if you're trusting it, but it's kind of like for medical intuition, when you have a young child and that child's crying, there's certain cries that you pick up, and you can call it instinct if you want,
Mm-hmm.
but I also call it medical intuition. You kind of know, is that an earache? Is it a stomach ache? There's things you just know as a parent. And then even with yourself, you have a symptom, you have to decide what to do with that. So you have to decide, do I need to go to a doctor? Do I need to rest? Which a lot of us don't listen to soon enough. Do I need to, eat something different? Do I take something, how do I approach what's going on in my body right now? So
Yeah.
you're doing medical intuition right there.
It's funny, as you were saying that, and you were talking about like the baby's cry, I was thinking about my dog.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can sometimes just look at my dog and I can tell that she needs to go out.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's like, but I don't, so I've always said, well, she's learned how to communicate to me non-verbally, but I can just tell, when she's sitting, just the way she's
Yep.
looking at me, it's like, yeah, she needs to go outside.
Yep.
And my wife and my daughter would be like, what do you mean? I'm like, she's telling you she needs to go out.
Right.
So I think we do have more of that than we realize. And I've just personally done a little bit of work with some mediums, done some kind of workshops, and
Yeah.
I've done some things. And they're like, well, just try to get, there's a person, and this was a woman whose son had passed, and
Right.
to try to get something on her son. And I was blown away by some of the things I got. I was like, I
Right.
didn't
Yep.
ever do this.
It's
But
as part of my workshops, I will say, I'm going to give you guys an exercise, and they'll look at me like, oh my God. And I'm going to give you a name and age, and I want you to write down everything you can get. And they literally are like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't do this. Like, don't make me do this. And I'm like, you don't have to, but
yeah,
it's not, no one's going to put it on the internet. So I just have them write down whatever they have. And then so they don't feel embarrassed or whatever, I'll go around and look,
Mhm.
and some of the people come because they already have an interest in what I do and they have some abilities, but not everybody. And it's really amazing how many details they can get.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll just give you real quick. This particular case, there was like a woman whose son had passed away, and they said, think of a song. And I thought of the song, and it was yellow rose of Texas. No, I know what they said. He's putting something in your hand, so think he's putting something in your hand. And what is it? And I said, it's a rose. And it says it's a yellow rose. And then I got the song Yellow Rose of Texas. So I was like, is there some connection to Texas? Well, I think they did have a connection to Texas, but the wild thing was she was doing this from her car. And her husband had given her a rose like a week or so before, and it was still in her car. She picks up this rose and says, "There's this yellow rose in my car that her son had given her, or her husband given her, in remembrance of her son." And I was like, "This is crazy." So
my world.
I say this to people to encourage you to try these things. And I've done these several times. I'm usually off, but there have been a couple of times that they've been like, crazy accurate. So I think we all need to just work on that ability.
And also to not necessarily overanalyze it, because I've learned with my stuff to just put down what I hear. And I may not know what it is or the significance of it, or I may not, like, even the client at first may not, they're like, I'm not really sure what that is. And by the end of the report, we're like, oh God, we figured that out.
Yeah.
So because of self-doubt, people don't tend to allow things, or they think too much about it. And it could be symbolic sometimes, there's so many things. And you don't, in daily life, you don't really have an opportunity to test that a lot,
No, you don't. But like I said, I would just encourage people to write the things down when these synchronicities happens to you, these things we call coincidences, and start to look out for them. And I found with myself, I'll have dreams that sometimes the next day something will happen. I'm like, one day I dreamed about a mailbox being knocked over. The next day I went for my walk, there was a mailbox laying over. Stuff like that. And just start to pick up on those things and start to trust yourself a little bit more.
No, I think for me, one of the comments I often get is, you seem so grounded for the work you do.
I wanted to ask you about that.
But it's really important to me to not make this woo-woo and not make it weird and scary, because to me, it's just love. We're just connecting with love and other people, and it's natural. And it's just because you can't see it or touch it sometimes doesn't mean it's not real. And I don't want people to substitute, use me as a guru or think like I love having clients and I love working with people, but I'm the first one to teach them how to connect to their loved ones, because they don't really want to talk to a meeting. They want to talk to them. It's that people don't trust them. So I'm like, no, let me teach you. And they're like, really? Yeah. So that's
I do love that about what you're saying. And I guess I've been very fortunate because the people that I've worked with, the mediums I've met and stuff, they all say the same thing. I like to work myself out of a job. You can all do this. Now, we're never going to trust, we're never going to trust ourselves about someone else, because the other thing I've realized is, for me anyway, and talking to me, it's almost like your imagination. You hear it in your own voice. Most people don't objectively see spirit. They're not hearing their voices. It's subtle impressions.
Exactly.
And we can all get those things. And we all, like when you're sitting there and you're thinking of someone and the phone rings.
Exactly.
And it's the person that you happen to be thinking of. I mean, we've all had that experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And right before my grandfather died, my grandmother wasn't particularly, she didn't talk about being a medium. We didn't talk about this stuff except when I brought stuff up to talk to her. But my grandfather was in hospice and she didn't go the day that he died. And actually, I'm the one who said it's okay to go. And he went, which was interesting for me. But anyway, so I said, she said something about, I wasn't there. I didn't go today to hospice. And I said, yeah, I know, that's okay. She said, no, it's because clear as day, the night before I saw him sitting in his chair and I knew that he had gone, so it doesn't have to be weird. It happens all the time.
Yeah. It's a lot more common than we think.
Yeah.
Katie, any last words you want to say before we leave for this afternoon?
I would love if people checked out my website.
Oh, absolutely.
It's Katie Beecher. No, it's not. Yes, it is. It's katiebeecher.com. There's too many going through my head. katiebeecher.com. And I'm on Instagram. It's Katie Beecher Medical Intuitive. And Facebook, the same thing. I'd love it if you guys checked it out and, follow me, make comments, ask questions, whatever. I'm always happy to hear from people.
Yeah, it sounds great. I will definitely put the links in the show notes when this comes out. And we'll be on the lookout for your book, and maybe you can come back when the book comes out and we can
I would
talk about it a
love
little bit
to.
more. Yeah.
And where are you located?
I'm in Ohio,
Oh,
Cincinnati.
that's right. You've told me that. If I ever do a workshop near you, you can come and try out your intuitive painting abilities.
Yeah, if we ever get out from under this COVID thing. Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah, we're all tired of it at this point. Katie, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Thanks for being here today.
You too. Thank you so much.
That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day.